At 1:30 a.m., I heard a shovel hit dirt outside my bedroom window. It was a single hollow thud that cut through the night like a warning. I lay there frozen, listening to the scrape of metal and the faint hiss of soil sliding back into place, and for a long minute I told myself it was nothing, fox, raccoon, some neighbor stashing yard waste. Then the shovel hit dirt again, slower this time, and I realized I didn't know my neighbor at all. I'm going to tell you 3 neighbor stories that still sit under my skin. They're not movie scenes with tidy endings. None of them resolve the way you want them to. They're just things that happened to a guy who thought suburban life was predictable. I'm a regular homeowner. These are the nights and afternoons that made me stop assuming the people next door were ordinary. If you like true creepy stories, stick around and make sure you're subscribed. I've got more of these. The first one is about Charles, his wife Kathy, and a hole that showed up in the backyard one evening like a secret that wasn't supposed to exist. We'd lived 3 houses down from them for a couple years. Charles kept to himself. He mowed, he waved. He'd come over sometimes to borrow tools. The neighbors knew about his son. Everyone did. The boy had disappeared 5 years earlier. There were flyers for a few months, a news segment, the solemn looks at community barbecues. After a while, people stopped bringing it up. Grief, gossip, and time did the rest. One Saturday in early fall, Charles called and asked to borrow my best shovel. He sounded uneasy over the phone, like he was apologizing before he'd even started. I handed it over without thinking much of it. Someone losing a child, people do odd things to cope. He came by that evening and took the shovel, said he needed to plant something for Kathy, something to remember him by. He didn't say the son's name. He didn't have to. That night, I woke up to the sound of the shovel. It was during the hours when the neighborhood is supposed to sleep. From my upstairs window, I could see Charles under the weak light of his porch, stooped over a hole that gleamed like an open mouth. He was wearing an old jacket and a cap pulled low. He'd already dug a decent hole. He'd put something dark in the middle of it. At first, I thought it was a mound of mulch. Then I realized it was a black garbage bag. He climbed in and out of the hole more than once. He tamped the soil down with his boots. The world outside my window felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. At some point he looked up. I ducked behind my curtain. My stomach folded itself into a knot. For all I know, it was coincidence. Maybe he'd been burying pet food or compost or a rusted grill barbecue part. I stood there for 5 minutes? 10? And then I heard him dig again. This time the rhythm sped up like he wanted to finish before dawn. He worked until he was exhausted, and then he filled the hole in like nothing had ever been uncovered. The next morning, the yard looked normal. Grass. A faint, flattened patch where earth had been disturbed. That should have been the end of it. But when I'd casually wave hello a few days later, Charles looked at me with a kind of blankness that felt more like avoidance than shame. He started peeking through my curtains sometimes, just watching my living room as if he were trying to read something he couldn't name. Once he was out pacing his own lawn, and he stopped right at the property line and stared at me and my wife through the window for a long minute. Then he shut his blinds and walked away. That image is the one that stuck with me. A man who borrowed my shovel, digging at night, then pretending nothing ever happened. Weeks later, late one afternoon, Kathy waved from her kitchen doorway when we were leaving for work. She seemed tired but fine. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Charles didn't come out that day. I wanted to ask him what he'd been doing that night. I wanted to ask what had been in the black bag. Instead, I found myself telling myself things people tell themselves to sleep. Grief makes folks strange. People act out in ways that don't make sense. Maybe he was burying something harmless. I convinced myself it was over. Then, one evening, I was in my living room when I saw motion in his side yard. A truck came and parked behind his house. Men with flashlights and long coats moved like ghosts at dusk. I pulled back from the window, my heart heavier than I expected. And I imagined all the worst possibilities. For all I know, those men were landscapers. For all I know, nothing at all had happened. but the world had changed in a way I couldn't undo. When the truck left the same night, the ground where the bag had been was smooth and sealed. Charles was quieter after that. He avoided eye contact. He'd sometimes stand at his blinds and just stare. Once, in broad daylight, he was looking straight into our house with a face I couldn't read. He shut the blinds so hard it made the window rattle. I never called him on it. I didn't confront him. There were reasons, fear mostly, and a sense of not wanting to be the person who made someone else's pain public. Also, there's this strange, self-preserving logic that runs through situations like that. If you say something, you might force the unknown into a thing you have to deal with. If you don't say anything, it might just stay a mystery forever. I chose the latter. I watched him move like a ghost around his own life, watched him peer through blinds as if searching for confirmation that nothing had changed, and I held an image. A shovel, a black bag, an evening stretched thin with possibility. I never learned what was in that bag. I still don't. When I tell this story now, people ask why I didn't call the police. I don't have a solid answer. There's embarrassment and the thought that maybe I'd be wrong, and there's the fear of escalating something that wasn't mine to handle. It's easier to live with a question than with a certainty that you might have ruined someone. At night, though, I replay the sound of that shovel. Every time the earth makes a noise in my yard, my muscles tighten. Maybe that makes me cautious. Maybe it makes me complicit. Either way, the image lingers. The second story goes back to when I was 15 and had my first place with my parents. It's about two boys, Todd and Eric, who lived next door, and how small-town threats can feel absolute when you're young. Todd and Eric were the kind of kids who existed at the edge of the neighborhood. They were quiet, rarely came to community things, and their dad kept mostly to himself. You heard about them because of the things other teens said, just talk at school, the kind that grows into rumor. When you're 15, rumors are facts until proven otherwise. One summer afternoon, they invited my younger brother and me down to the river. At first it felt like a good thing, boys shooting BB guns, messing around, learning to look out for each other. We laughed. We traded stories that felt bigger than our small town. Then they brought a real gun down from the back of the truck, not a rumor anymore. It sat on a blanket like something that didn't belong. Todd picked it up and cocked it like a toy. The weight of it in his hands made a different kind of silence. They started telling us what they could do, what would happen if we told anyone. There were phrases, simple, direct. I'd kill you. Shut up about us. And the casual way it was delivered made it feel like a law of physics. They wanted control, and they had the means to try to enforce it. The first time they threatened us, it felt like the rest of the world narrowed to the barrel of that gun. A few nights later, at just after midnight, I woke to a sharp rap at my bedroom window. My room was at the back of the house, and the curtains were thin that summer. I thought it was the neighbor boys messing around, a prank, until the curtain moved, and a face filled the frame. Eric's face, pale and smiling, and then his hand pushed the window open and hit the sill. I remember the cold metal against my temple, before I had time to be clever about anything. There was a whisper right by my ear, "Don't tell anyone. You tell and we'll kill you and your family." I can still hear the whisper sometimes when it's quiet. What follows felt like days of being watched. They would be at their window, lights off, silhouettes hunched over glass. Sometimes a rock thudded against our bedroom window late at night. Once, the rock was followed by the shining reflection of a barrel pointed at us through the split in the blinds. There were no direct attacks on others, no break-ins, no public fights, but the message was consistent. Watch your step, or the consequences are real. My parents were worried, sure, but we never laid it out cleanly. We said we were being bullied. We didn't show the gun, because who keeps a photo of that? We said nothing about the whisper at my temple. Our family moved a few months later for reasons that, at the time, were wrapped in job changes and opportunity. We left in the middle of the night with boxes on the porch and locked doors. I sometimes replay whether leaving was cowardice or survival. I never told the police. To this day, I can't say why. Maybe I thought I could outrun what had shadowed us. There's a particular brand of shame that sticks with you when you choose silence out of fear. It's not the same as guilt exactly, but it sits close. You start measuring yourself by decisions you made at 15 under a heavy weight. Would reporting have helped? Maybe. Would it have made things worse? Maybe. The point is, it was unresolved. Todd and Eric stayed on that corner of my life like a dent in the furniture you can't move. We moved on physically, but their threats echoed in the way my bedroom window feels even now when someone knocks at night. The third story is more recent and in some ways the only one where I involved the police. It's about living next to two women, an older neighbor who kept her curtains shut, and a younger woman who had episodes that terrified me without meaning to. This one ends with me dialing for help and still feeling like nothing was really fixed. I was in my mid-20s then, renting a cheap place while trying to get on my feet. The house next door had two tenants, an older woman who kept to herself, and a younger woman who, for lack of a better word, had episodes. She screamed sometimes, shrill animal sounds that cut through the night and made the hairs on my arms stand up. There was a night when the screaming got worse and longer, the kind that makes you think about calling someone, but you don't know who. It went on until late. I went outside and confronted them, something I'd never done with neighbors before. I wanted to be neighborly and firm. The older woman came to the door and said in a tone that was all corners and contempt, "Mind your business." The younger woman was behind her, wiping her face, wild-eyed and not listening. That should have been the end of it. Instead, a few hours after I went to bed, I woke to the sensation of someone standing in my room. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. The moonlight sliced across the floor, and there was the shadow of a person at the edge of the bed. Then I saw the face, inches from mine, and it was the young woman. She was breathing hard. Her eyes were enormous and wild, but not malevolent, more lost than anything. I couldn't move. My body shut down with fear. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me. Up close, you could see people who are on the edge of something. Their faces are raw with strain. I don't want to make assumptions about her state. She may have been severely unwell. What I do know is I felt in immediate danger, and I ran. I ran out the front door in my socks, heart hammering, and called the police from the street. When they arrived, I watched officers speak with the woman and then take her to a car. She was quiet in the back seat, not resisting much. The older neighbor watched from behind a curtain, and when she saw the patrol car, she came outside long enough to stare at me, like I'd broken something very important. She said nothing. Her stare felt like a verdict. The cops told me they were taking the younger woman in for the night for evaluation. I was relieved and terrified at the same time. Relief lasted a few hours. After that, the fear came back with a softer edge. The older woman's stare lingered. She started to drive by my house a little slower, watching. She would take her car out at odd times and peer into my yard as she passed. One afternoon, when I was unloading groceries, she sat in her car and glared at me until I looked up. I smiled weakly and kept moving. The young woman came back after a few weeks. She was calmer, quieter, but I could see the frayed edges in her behavior. I thought about moving, about the safety of my own four walls. But moving isn't always simple. I thought about what it would mean to be the one who sounds the alarm, who says, "This person should not be back here," and felt the weight of judging someone who might be ill. I'd called the police that night because I felt there was an imminent danger. The cops did their duty, and for the night the immediate threat was gone. But the longer arc didn't change. The houses stayed the same. The woman with episodes and the older neighbor remained neighbors. The evening when the woman stood at my bed is something I replay in alleyways of my memory where fear lives. I have compassion for the young woman now. Compassion mixed with the knowledge that my life was unsettled for a while because of the unpredictability next door. The older woman's face, her cold look, remains one of the quieter hauntings. What ties these three stories together isn't a murderer or a single villain. It's the texture of ordinary life being punctured by things you can't fully explain. A shovel in the middle of the night, a gun in the hands of neighborhood kids, a face at the edge of your bed. It's the sense that privacy is fragile, that the people who live closest to you can be the ones who make your stomach drop in the dark. It's also the way each of us responded, sometimes with silence, sometimes with flight, and once with a call to the police, and how none of those responses neatly resolved the fear. Every one of these incidents left me with a lesson that feels less like wisdom and more like a bruise. The first is about assumptions. Grief looks different on different people, and sometimes you never know what someone is doing in their yard late at night. The second is about courage, or the lack of it. You can run and you can survive and still carry the memory of a barrel at your window. The third is about compassion mixed with self-preservation. You can recognize someone's suffering and still fear for your safety. If there's advice tucked into these stories, it's messy. Be cautious, yes, but don't let fear turn you into someone who lives behind impenetrable curtains. Tell someone you trust when something feels off, and understand that not all dangers are legal cases. You won't always get neat endings. I didn't become a detective or a hero. I became someone who notices the small things. A shovel that strikes the earth at 1:30 a.m. will always make me wake up. I still catch myself watching the neighbors sometimes. If a curtain twitches, my head snaps to the window. If a car idles too long, I watch it go. I shut blinds a little tighter than I used to, and every once in a while I hear the hollow thud of a shovel in my mind, and I'm back at that night, asking the same questions I've never had the courage to ask out loud. What was in that black bag? Were we ever truly safe at 15? Did calling the police fix anything permanently? The honest answers are thin on detail and long on doubt. If you've lived next to someone who made your skin crawl, you know what I mean. If not, maybe keep an ear out, keep your doors locked, and, if you feel like it, share your story below. Tell me about the neighbor that haunted you, the strange things you overheard, the moments you replay when the lights go out. I read every comment. If you want more of these, subscribe. There are other nights and other noises I can't shake.